guys, welcome back. We have the actual documents from the CMA in terms of Sony's response to the provisional findings. There's also a bigger document in terms of Microsoft's response to the provisional findings, and I'll go over that in another video. But let's go through and read Sony Interactive Entertainment's observations on the CMA's remedies. All right, guys, welcome back to another video. We got some big documents dropped for the Xbox Activision Blizzard acquisition, and it is the responses from Sony and from Microsoft in terms of CMA's remedies notice, the provisional findings, all of those types of things. So this video, we're going to go over Sony's response. As you can see here, Sony Interactive Entertainment observations on the CMA remedies notice. Now, this is 13 pages. It's going to take a little bit of time to read it all. So strap in, bear with me, and we'll go through and see what Sony says. So Sony Interactive Entertainment's observations on the CMA's remedies notice. Sony Interactive Entertainment welcomes the opportunity to comment on the CMA's notice of possible remedies in connection with its provisional findings on the Microsoft Activision Blizzard transaction. Based on compelling body of evidence, including 3 million Microsoft and Activision documents, over 50 requests for information, more than 2,100 emails from the public, in multiple categories of economic data, the provisional findings find that Microsoft could substantially lessen competition in consoles and cloud gaming by withholding Activision content, in particular Call of Duty, from its competitors. So this was the main thing that these documents were about. We went over their findings. They focused on Microsoft potentially being able to foreclose Sony if they withheld Call of Duty. They talked about things like 24% of gamers would switch over to a different platform if Call of Duty was taken off of the platform. We also know they didn't take into account the 10-year deals that Microsoft had offered and the 10-year deals that were accepted by NVIDIA GeForce Now and by Nintendo after those provisional findings came out. So keep that in mind when they're talking about this stuff with Call of Duty. They looked at the cloud gaming, thinking that it will be hard for competitors to get into cloud gaming if they don't have access to the Activision Blizzard catalog, specifically Call of Duty, all of that type of stuff. And Sony here is agreeing with that assessment, saying SIE agrees with the CMA's assessment. SEA also concurs with the CMA's view, as set out in the remedies notice, that the harm the transaction would cause could only be addressed through prohibition or structural remedies. And the CMA was looking for structural remedies, but they kept the door open for the behavioral remedies, which would be those 10-year deals. Now, the remedies notice considers an argument made by Microsoft that a behavioral commitment would be suitable because of existing potential contractual arrangements with third-party platforms relating to the access of Call of Duty. So right there, they are admitting, the CMA is admitting that the contractual arrangements with Call of Duty, with third parties, 10-year deals, all the type of stuff will be suitable for this deal where they wouldn't have to go through these structural remedies. Microsoft appears to suggest that such arrangements could prevent any loss of competition arising from the transaction, but the existence of such arrangements today says nothing about whether they are capable of addressing competition concerns identified in the provisional findings, in particular, given that those concerns reflect the CMA's determination that the merged entity post-transaction incentives would be very different from Activision's current incentives. Now, in terms of this, I believe Xbox, Microsoft said they would even be willing to get a third party involved with making sure and enforcing the deals that they make for Call of Duty going forward. So right there, you could argue that Microsoft won't live up to the expectations from these contractual arrangements that they have made prior to the approval of this agreement. But if they bring in a third party to enforce those things, they will essentially be forced to live up to those expectations. So those expectations would be the same game on every platform, parity across everything, content, features, everything about Call of Duty, which Microsoft, Xbox, Phil Spencer have said multiple times that's exactly what they are going to do. And if you look at Call of Duty in today's current state, there is no parity. PlayStation has exclusive content. They have exclusive features that the Xbox version, the PC version don't get. So they're pretty much arguing that they are scared that Microsoft is going to do what Sony is already doing. Number 4, in any event, the remedies notice explains that none of these circumstances in which the CMA would approve the transaction based on a behavioral remedy are present. The CMA could not be clear that the circumstances in which the CMA might select a behavioral remedy as the primary source of remedial action are not present in this case, including because of the dynamic nature of the two markets in which a significant lessening of competition is identified. Accordingly, the CMA explains that any behavioral remedy in this case is likely to present material effectiveness risks, and the SIE agrees. Of course, they would agree with that. As explained below, the dynamic and evolving nature of the gaming industry, the competitive lever of that a behavioral commitment would give Microsoft over PlayStation's fate, for example, by controlling Call of Duty pricing and quality, and Microsoft's history of non-compliance with behavioral commitments means that behavioral remedies are not suited in this case. So they're arguing here that Xbox could just raise the price of Call of Duty for the PlayStation version, which it just, again, it doesn't make any sense why they would do that. They wouldn't want to do that. They wouldn't want to hurt a consumer base that is already so large for that platform when they would be selling it to consumers who would be creating revenue for Microsoft. Because although they're playing on PlayStation, Sony and PlayStation are still going to have to pay Microsoft for those licensing of Call of Duty, for the rights to have it in their platform, which will just help Xbox and Microsoft grow their platform. So I don't see why they would want to at all hinder such a massive community on another platform. The return on investment there doesn't make any sense, at least the way that I look at it, but who knows. This paper proceeds first by examining the structural remedies proposed in the remedies notice, full prohibition and divestiture of parts of Activision's business. Section 1 explains how prohibiting the transaction would effectively address the competitive harms identified in the provisional findings. Section 2 shows that divesting parts of Activision's business would also address the CMA's competition concerns. So they really want that divestiture. They really want divestiture of Call of Duty. That's what Sony wants. That's their end goal of all this. They want to make sure that they aren't going to be paying all that money to Xbox for having Call of Duty on their platform and maybe other games as well. So that's what their goal is. The paper then turns to an examination of behavioral remedies. The Section 3 explains why behavioral remedies are not suitable in this case, using Microsoft's proposal to SIE regarding the access of Call of Duty as illustration. It explains that any access commitment would be inadequate. It also suggests, through an examination of Microsoft's past conduct, why any behavioral commitment offered by Microsoft should be treated with caution, and Section 4 concludes. So Section 3 here, we're going to be looking at why Sony doesn't believe that the 10-year deal offered to them and the offer that Microsoft is willing to sit down and negotiate the entire thing for Call of Duty, even if that maybe will be more than 10 years, who knows, is not going to be suitable for SIE. It will still harm them in the long run. So Section 1, the transaction should be prohibited. The CMA's merger remedies guidelines, the guidelines explain that when considering remedies, the CMA must respect the need to achieve as comprehensive a solution as is reasonable and practicable to address the competitive harm the CMA has identified and any adverse effects resulting from it. The CMA will therefore seek remedies that can effectively address the harm and its effects in the least costly, intrusive, and disproportionate manner. The remedies notice identifies prohibition of the transaction as a comprehensive solution to the competition concerns the CMA has identified in the provisional findings. It also finds that the risks of this remedy are very low. SIE agrees. Okay, so they agree that the risks of the prohibition of the transaction as a comprehensive solution. So basically they're saying that they want this deal to be blocked. Prohibiting the transaction would safeguard against the foreclosure strategies Microsoft could employ with withholding or degrading the access to Activision content, something that they've already said they aren't doing. They aren't withholding it. They aren't going to be degrading the game whatsoever on PlayStation, but they still bring that up because they want the CMA to believe that that is a real thing that is going to happen, even though Microsoft says that it isn't going to happen. They want them to believe that Microsoft is lying about this. It would be by definition, restore the pre-transaction competitive conditions, and it would do so in clear-cut, proportionate, and a straightforward manner. So basically, to translate, Sony is saying, we're the leaders, and we don't want that to change. This deal may change that. Although we will still be able to compete on a very high level, we don't want Microsoft encroaching on our lead. So we got to stop this deal. That's essentially the way I read that line there. Section 2, a structural divestiture could also address the competition concerns raised by the transaction. SEA agrees with the remedies notice that divesting part of Activision's business could also address the CMA's competition concerns. The remedies notice proposes divesting either Activision's Call of Duty business, so Call of Duty, selling that off, and then they won't have to worry about paying Microsoft money for Call of Duty. It's Activision business segment, so the entirety of Activision, all of the IPs in there, tons of IPs that they haven't made games for in a while. They have a huge back catalog that will probably still stay dormant if they sell it off. But Phil Spencer, if we believe what he is saying, he says he's excited about that back catalog, which you would cross your fingers and hope that they're going to bring back some of these games. Bring back a new Spyro game. That would be super cool. I know they just made Crash 4, make Crash 5. They did a remake of Tony Hawk, bring back a brand new Tony Hawk. Like, there's so many IPs within the Activision catalog, Legacy of Kain, like all of these things, right? Bring those games back. I think that would be just an awesome thing to see. And maybe with this deal going through, Microsoft is going to dive deeper into that backlog and bring us awesome games that we're all going to be able to play. Or 3, both its Activision and Blizzard segments. So this is interesting. So they're saying that they should be selling off Call of Duty, Activision segment, or both Blizzard and the Activision segment, which would mean that they only are keeping King, right? And I mean, I guess you could say fair play by Sony here, because Microsoft has said that they care mostly about this deal. King, that's what they care about, the mobile side of gaming. So if they want the mobile side of gaming, give them that. Give them King. They'll have all that stuff. The one thing that people are forgetting, though, is that Call of Duty mobile makes like them the most money. So they wouldn't be getting that, which is probably a key player with this deal for Microsoft to want to go through Call of Duty Mobile, and then also Diablo Immortal, which would mean if they were to sell off Activision and Blizzard, they wouldn't get access to those. I don't think Microsoft's interested in that. I feel like they would just walk away from the deal if this was something that they had to do. These divestment options would ensure that critical Activision content such as Call of Duty and under the CMA's third option, World of Warcraft, would remain in independent hands. Post-divestment, there would also be no need for further monitoring or enforcement, which again, Microsoft has said, we will get that third party to monitor and enforce all of the aspects of this deal, which wouldn't have to happen if they sold off these parts. At least this would satisfy Sony, where they wouldn't care about the enforcement. In considering divestment options, the CMA would need to ensure that the divested entity would be able to compete viably on a standalone basis and without support of those parts of Activision's business that might remain with Microsoft, example, the King business. SIE is not aware of the extent to which the Activision business units identified in the remedies notice are integrated together as a whole, such that divesting one or more of these units could impair the divested entity's ability to compete and innovate on a standalone basis. SIE trusts that the CMA will take this account in weighing up different remedy options. So basically they're saying, we have no idea if selling off these parts of the business will hurt these businesses in the long run, would hurt the employees working there, would hurt the competition, the content that is made. Everything could potentially be hurt if we force them to do this, if the CMA forces them to sell off those parts instead of taking everything with this deal. We're just going to leave that up to you to figure that out, but we think you should do it because we don't want this deal to go through in the form as a complete business merger with the entirety of Activision, Blizzard, King. So they don't care what happens as long as Call of Duty isn't taken with this deal, essentially. And even they mentioned World of Warcraft. Part 3, CMA guidance. Microsoft's recent proposal and Microsoft's past conduct show that behavioral commitments are not suitable in this case. The remedies notice does not propose a behavioral remedy to address the competitive harms identified in the provisional findings. Instead, it states that the CMA will consider the possibility of a behavioral remedy in response to Microsoft's submission about existing and potential contractual protections. Notably, the remedy notice does not discuss what a behavioral remedy might entail, and it expresses skepticism that any behavioral remedy could effectively resolve the competition concerns the provisional findings have found. So again, they're skeptical about that 10-year deal. They don't think it's going to solve any of the concerns. For several reasons, behavioral remedies are not suitable in this case. First, none of the circumstances identified in the guidelines for behavioral remedies are present. Second, behavioral remedies in this case would raise the risk that the guidelines seek to avoid. And third, behavioral remedies cannot adequately address the myriad ways Microsoft could circumvent its obligations. And this is something, I mean, to be completely honest, it is a valid concern to have that they could use their expertise in law, use their expertise in business, a $1 trillion company, to propose these remedies to the regulators. The regulators say, okay, great, we'll pass the deal. And then after the fact, find loopholes to circumvent them. That is a real concern to have. However, Microsoft again has said that they would get a third party to enforce this type of stuff. This is confirmed by the agreement alluded in the remedies notice that Microsoft has proposed to SAE to maintain Call of Duty on PlayStation. Microsoft's past conduct of violating behavioral commitments and promises to the public further shows that its representations must be treated with caution. None of these circumstances identifying the guidelines for behavioral remedy are present here. The guidelines set out a well-established framework for when a behavioral remedy can in principle address an SLC, again, significant lessening of competition. So whenever I say SLC, that's what that means, arising from a merger. As a preliminary point, the guidelines explain that behavioral remedies are less likely to deal with the source of a competition concern, less likely to have an effective impact on competition concern, and its resulting effects, more likely to create significant costly distortions in market outcomes and often require monitoring and enforcement once implemented. So they're saying they don't believe that any of these remedies will take away those concerns of Microsoft being able to foreclose PlayStation, hurt competition, and just pretty much have be the market authority in terms of video game and nobody ever being able to compete with them in the future, which, I mean, many people look at this and think that Sony is just bullshitting because they have such a huge lead right now. Well, they have like such a strong position, I would say is probably a better way to put it. In the gaming market, they have such strong IPs, crazy recognition, even from their TV shows now. Like they're integrating and doing all these things that will help them continue to be strong in gaming, and they're expanding out their subscription services. They're getting more into games as a service models, at least multiplayer models where they just don't really compete on. We've heard about the amount they're trying to make by 2026. All of these things are going to help PlayStation still be able to compete even if this deal goes through, and they're still going to be getting all of the Activision catalog in terms of at least Call of Duty on staying on their platform, which is the big one. They're still going to be getting Call of Duty and keep that entire player base, where they've literally come out and said, without Call of Duty, we can't even invest in our own first party IPs, which crazy to think about. If that is true, just tells me that PlayStation, I guess, doesn't have as strong of a model as a lot of people think they do, if that is actually the truth of the matter. In light of these concerns, the CMA has made clear that it will generally only consider behavioral remedies in 3 circumstances. As the remedies notice notes, none of these circumstances are present in this case. Whether divestiture or prohibition is feasible, the CMA may consider behavioral remedies if divestiture or prohibition are not feasible. Example, a transaction is closed and the businesses are integrated. Divestiture and prohibition are imminently feasible in this case. The transaction is not yet completed. Okay, of course. Whether the SLC is expected to have a short-term duration. If an SLC is expected to be a very short duration, the CMA may consider a behavioral remedy as a stopgap before broader industry developments rectify the harm resulting from a transaction. But there is nothing to suggest that this is the case here. Activision content, in particular Call of Duty, is and will continue to be an essential input for the gaming industry. The tremendous success of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is a testament to the ongoing importance and irreplaceability of the franchise, and the provisional findings specifically identify an SLC in cloud gaming, which is a nascent area that could take decades to evolve to maturity. So 10-year deals isn't enough for PlayStation. They don't think that in 10 years, they will be able to offset some of the market that they will be losing by this deal. They don't believe they have that ability, which I disagree with. They also don't believe that in 10 years, they're going to be able to create their subscription and cloud gaming service to a point where it will be more viable to compete with Microsoft, which you could say maybe that one, because cloud gaming takes a lot of technology and a lot of time to get up and running. It is still in its nascent time frame. I mean, it's still not like the mainstream way people play, but I think it will be coming to that. And I think Xbox, Microsoft have a huge lead in cloud gaming because, one, I guess they have the best infrastructure, but two, they started it before everybody in terms of making it a option that people actually thought about. Yeah, PlayStation Now came out previous to Xbox Cloud Gaming and to Xbox Game Pass, but it never took off. It's almost like PlayStation put it out there, didn't care about it that much. They didn't put a lot of effort into it. And then they just rolled it now into the new PlayStation Plus tiers with the cloud option with backwards compatibility and stuff. So they had plenty of time to focus on cloud gaming with PlayStation Now to try to grow it. They didn't. Xbox came in, And they did. They focused on it. They've grown it. They are committed to cloud gaming, where you could tell PlayStation just wasn't. And they don't believe in 10 years they're going to be able to get to a commitment level that will help them to compete, which I disagree with. I mean, Sony still has a lot of money. They still have a lot of technology and infrastructure where they would be able to get into cloud gaming further than they currently are, which would be able to allow them to compete with Microsoft. Maybe not on the same level. They may always be under them in terms of the amount of money it makes, but enough to be able to keep the market competitive, where both are going to have to continue to expand and grow and add more content to it, so that people have to have that option in their mind. Do I want to go PlayStation, or do I want to go with Xbox when it comes to cloud gaming? And then all the other options out there, like Amazon Luna, if that continues to expand, Tencent, if they expand into a cloud gaming subscription service in different parts of the world, all those things are going to come into play. So, in 10 years, I think that's going to really start picking up. All right, the next point here: whether behavioral measures can preserve a substantial customer benefit that would be removed by structural remedies. A third reason the CMA may consider a behavioral remedy is where there are substantial customer benefits that would be preserved by the behavioral remedy, but not a structural one. There is no evidence of this being the case here. In particular, behavioral remedies commitment for Microsoft to grant rivals access to Call of Duty would pose a greater, not lesser risk for consumers, as the myriad ways Microsoft could withhold or degrade access would be extremely difficult to monitor and police. So I completely disagree with this point here for a couple of reasons. First of all, we've already seen PlayStation not have parity with Call of Duty because they have the marketing deals, and Activision working with PlayStation actively to not have parity because of these marketing deals. So I disagree with that, because we will continue to see that going forward. There will be marketing deals of some sort if this deal doesn't go through. Will it be with PlayStation? Who knows? But it could be with Xbox. But either way, it's bad when you have a game that has additional features and content that is taken away from a platform that has the exact same game, but because of a company money hiding, they don't get certain things. That's just not a good thing. And Microsoft has already said that isn't going to be the case going forward if this deal goes through, which instantly makes this deal better for gamers already. It already makes it better for gamers, makes it better for the market. That's already a positive. Secondly, the state of employment at Activision, from all the bad things that have happened there, you have a bunch of people that would be stuck in that environment if this deal doesn't go through, and not go over to Microsoft, where the environment is significantly better from all the information we have recently about the workplace environment at Microsoft. So that alone will be worse for the industry. That alone will be worse for the games, because if you're working in a shitty environment, you're probably not making the best quality products that you can make. So all of these things are worse. If this deal goes through, I think there are so many more net positives that will happen for the gaming industry. Next, if Microsoft failed to comply with this commitment, it would likely only risk paying a fine, possibly many years later. But rivals' access to Call of Duty would be immediately foreclosed, irreparably damaging their ability to compete and ultimately harming consumers. So they just think they're going to lie about the entire thing. You can't change that with what Sony thinks about that. That's just the way it is. B, behavioral remedies would raise risks that the guidelines seek to avoid. The guidelines and the remedies notice make clear that behavioral remedies should avoid 4 specific types of risk. For the reasons explained below, these risks are all apparent in the present case. I'm just looking at here, 23 minutes. We're going through this. Specification risks arises where the form of conduct required to address competitive harm and its effect cannot be specified with sufficient detail and clarity for 2 reasons. This is likely to be the case here. First, given that the gaming industry is a dynamic and evolving market, particularly in the nascent sectors of multi-gaming subscription services and cloud gaming, any access commitment that Microsoft might make to competitors is unlikely to capture these developments with sufficient specificity to ensure competition in the future. Second, as explained in the section 3.d below, the commitment that Microsoft is prepared to make, evidenced by its most recent proposal to SCE regarding access to Call of Duty, would only oblige Microsoft to use its then a bunch of redacted stuff to ensure parity between Xbox and PlayStation, and more redacted stuff. This commitment falls short of specifying with sufficient clarity what would constitute compliant behavior to enable effective enforcement. So I wonder what that redacted stuff is. Are they talking about cloud gaming infrastructure? Who knows? Or just anything that would make Call of Duty run properly? Maybe development kits? Who knows? I'm not sure. I don't know. But anyways, we won't know because it's redacted. And then circumvention risk concerns that the possibility that other forms of adverse behavior may arise if certain forms of behavior are restricted. This is the case here. As described in section 3C below, there are multiple ways Microsoft could foreclose access to Activision content post-transaction, and it is doubtful that a behavioral remedy would capture each and every one of them. But even if a behavioral remedy could, it would be difficult both to detect and bar Microsoft from adopting a particular foreclosure strategy in time to prevent irreparable harm to rivals' competitiveness. And as the provisional findings find, Microsoft would have a strong incentive to employ the foreclosure strategies at its disposal to reduce competition. So they think that this entire thing is to just literally foreclose Sony, and they have great motivation to do that. That's what they're insinuating here. Distortion risk concerns the possibility that a behavioral remedy may create a market distortion that reduces effectiveness or increase costs. As explained in section 3D below, Microsoft's recent proposal to SAE regarding Call of Duty raises this risk as well. The pricing terms Microsoft has proposed for buy to play would effectively give Microsoft a lever to raise the price. SAE could charge gamers to play their favorite game. They really believe that Microsoft may raise the price of Call of Duty on PlayStation and not raise the price of it on Xbox. I absolutely don't see any benefit to Microsoft doing that. So I don't think that would happen. And for multi-game subscription services, Microsoft has proposed licensing arrangements that would, redacted, this would make PlayStation Plus commercially unviable, forcing SAE either to raise its multi-game subscription service prices or not offer Call of Duty on multi-game subscription services at all. So I'm guessing the arrangement that they made is going back to the 70-30 split where previously they had a deal with Activision. And do I think that Microsoft should give PlayStation a better deal because of the previous deal? Absolutely not. I think that they should be giving them the same deal they would be giving everybody. And they're saying that's not enough money for PlayStation. PlayStation is saying that 30% of the revenues from Call of Duty on their platform will not be enough for them to continue to operate SIE, essentially, and to continue to be able to make their games, their first party games. Just crazy to think about, because if that is the case, if that is truth, it feels like to me that Sony has had a terrible business model for years and years and years. If you need a deal with Activision to get more revenues, maybe 60-40, maybe 50-50, who knows, to be able to continue to invest and make your first party content, because Call of Duty is the only thing propping up your entire business, it just shows that virtuous cycle that Jim Ryan was talking about was essentially lying, because the virtual cycle isn't enough for them to even keep their business going based off of what they are saying here. To me, that's just crazy, saying that PlayStation Plus is commercially unviable. Nuts. But you know what would make PlayStation Plus commercially viable? Putting in your first party content into that service. But I guess they are arguing that they can't afford to do that again, which just to me calls into the entire question of their entire business model going forward if they're unable to adjust whatsoever with the way that gaming is going. One thing with business is that it doesn't matter how big you are. If you can't adjust to the changing trends of the market, you're going to end up failing. And this is what this sounds like to me, is PlayStation has failed to adjust to the trends of the market, which is going to be subscription and cloud gaming going forward, whether you like that or not. That's the way it seems like it's going. And they're terrified that this deal is going to make them just an unviable business. But we don't know if they're just saying that as well to try to get this deal blocked. Monitoring and enforcement risk concerns the possibility that behavioral remedies cannot be appropriately monitored and enforced. As noted, the many strategies of foreclosure available to Microsoft make it difficult for any behavioral remedy to be effectively monitored and practically enforced. And given the fast pace at which the gaming industry is evolving, it would be challenging to tailor a remedy that would provide the means to monitor Microsoft's ongoing compliance. So they don't believe a third party will be able to monitor it all. Section C. We're halfway through the document and we are 30 minutes in this video. This may be like an hour video. The different mechanisms available to Microsoft to avoid its obligations mean any behavioral remedy is not suitable in this case. Number 17, as the provisional findings recognize, Microsoft could deploy multiple strategies to fully or partially foreclosure access to Activision content. In relation to Call of Duty, SAE has also explained that in addition to withholding access to existing or future Call of Duty titles, Microsoft could adopt one or several partial foreclosure strategies to impair PlayStation's competitiveness. These strategies would include Again, they're going back with raising the price of Call of Duty on PlayStation, degrading the quality of performance of Call of Duty on PlayStation compared to Xbox, degrading Call of Duty to ignore PlayStation-specific features, better controller haptics, or not prioritizing investment in such features. That's a funny one because, yeah, like Call of Duty does take into account the haptics on the DualSense and the triggers, which the triggers themselves, I feel like, are a worse thing in Call of Duty. It's like they've prioritized that as a feature for selling the game. But I feel like the majority of people who play it turn them off. It just is not a good feature. The triggers on the DualSense, I don't personally like them. And definitely when playing Call of Duty, I think it actually reduces the experience because you're playing online and like the trigger, you can't even aim your gun properly when the thing is friggin' flapping around. So I turn them off. Anyways, restricting, degrading, or not prioritizing investment in the multiplayer experience on PlayStation or making Call of Duty available on Game Pass only. A behavioral remedy would not be able to protect fully against these kinds of strategies to take these examples. So they clearly would want Call of Duty within their PlayStation Plus, but at the same time up here, they say that it would make it commercially unviable for them, even with that split. I think even if it wasn't in PlayStation Plus, but I guess it's still something to be afraid of, that they would only put it on Game Pass and everyone would go over to Game Pass rather than paying and playing the game on PlayStation at full price. A behavioral remedy would not be able to protect fully against these kinds of strategies. To take 3 examples. First, on pricing, Microsoft would be licensing a critical gaming input to its horizontal competitor and would therefore have a clear incentive to raise the price of Call of Duty to degrade PlayStation's competitiveness. This is just speculation. Like, they're not going to do this. They keep saying this, but they're absolutely not going to do this. It's just clear speculation here on their part. And if you're a regulator, I mean, if you don't follow the industry whatsoever, you could think that that is true. I mean, you may look at that and say, yeah, you're right, they're going to do that. And they're going to raise it and make it $100 on PlayStation and $70 on Xbox, which will give zero incentives to gamers to actually ever go out and buy it on PlayStation. And there's an obvious economic change in the incentive between negotiating with an independent Activision today. The independent Activision today and an Activision acquired by Microsoft. Today, Activision is incentivized to reach an agreement with SIE to distribute Call of Duty. Post-transaction, the merged entity would benefit from a failure to distribute Call of Duty on PlayStation. This dramatically improves the merged entity's bargaining position and would allow Microsoft to obtain a higher revenue share for its content than would be achieved on the merits with an independent Activision. So they would be playing dirty business is very much what they're saying. They wouldn't be a company of their word, which Valve and Gabe Newell already said that they don't even need a deal because they trust Xbox. They trust Phil Spencer. They trust Microsoft with what they're going to be doing with the game. 20. It is not clear how any behavioral commitment could adequately address such a concern in a dynamic industry such as gaming. Even a monitoring trustee backed by a licensing commitment based on fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms raises intractable practical problems. Who would set the prices and how? What level of information sharing and communications would be permissible? How would it be determined whether prices were fair? How would non-discrimination be ensured given that Microsoft would be making a purely internal accounting transfer? And who would make the determination as to fairness, reasonableness, and non-discrimination? The situation is therefore diametrically different to a regulated industry where the CMA has on a few occasions considered licensing commitments that a sectoral regulator has the expertise and resources to act as a price regulator on an ongoing basis. So they just don't think that even a third party will really be able to enforce the pricing and the content, all that stuff. Second, the partial foreclosure mechanisms described above could arise even without an active decision on the part of Microsoft to degrade Call of Duty on PlayStation. Interesting. So they're saying this all can happen, even if Microsoft is true to their word, honorable to the deal that they have made. This will just happen either way. Instead, partial foreclosure could result simply from Microsoft's differing incentives post-transaction as compared to an independent Activision. Post-transaction, Microsoft will need to make choices about the support it will provide to develop any PlayStation version of Call of Duty. Okay, so they would, I mean, you look at gaming today and they're all using the same architecture, which is why I just get so confused when you have developers who have issues developing the game on one platform versus another. And especially we've seen information come out where essentially from these documents, developers, I think it was the third, I'm not sure what third party developer, but some entity had said it doesn't increase the cost really. It doesn't really take that much more time in order to create the version of a game for the other platform, basically because they are the same. I mean, and we still have these arguments that, oh, it'll be more time consuming and difficult to develop a game for PlayStation over Xbox, which their x86 architecture. Yeah, there's a couple more features here on Xbox that can be utilized. We haven't even seen those features utilized in most games, like the RDNA 2 stuff. Will they in the future? Sure. But as of right now, I think it's just when there's that lead platform, the developers themselves spend 80% of their time developing it for the lead platform, and then the other version of the game hasn't been optimized yet, and the game's supposed to come out in a couple of months. So that's where the problems they run into potentially. It's just, I guess, time management. But I don't feel like it's any harder. I'm not a developer, so if you're a developer, let me know in the comments below. But I don't feel like it's that much harder to develop a game for PS5 and then transfer it over to Xbox or vice versa. Even if Microsoft operated in good faith, it would be incentivized to support and prioritize development for Xbox, which, I mean, what they do currently right now, I'm assuming with Call of Duty, because of the marketing deal, they prioritize development for PlayStation 5. I mean, look at Baldur's Gate 3, the controversy that's going on right now. They obviously prioritize development for Baldur's Gate 3 on PlayStation. I mean, the game was at the PlayStation showcase. They have the marketing deal with it. It's not because it's hard to develop it for Xbox, it's because they've spent the majority of their resources and time developing it for PS5 that they've had to fail at announcing a release date for, because they don't know if it will be available at the same time. I think that's just all has to do with the marketing deals and stuff like that, where they just put all of their time and effort into one version of the game because they get all of that money from PlayStation. It's happening right now across the industry. So they're arguing that Xbox would potentially do what PlayStation does with a ton of games, such as by using its best engineers and more of its resources. Again, which happens all the time with all of these timed exclusive deals that PlayStation makes, or even the exclusive deals that Xbox makes. There will be no practical way for the CMA or SIE to monitor how Microsoft chooses to allocate its resources and the quantity of engineers it devotes to the PlayStation version of Call of Duty to ensure that SIE would be treated fairly and equally. Okay. I mean, I don't know how they would enforce that, but this is going to happen either way, whether this deal goes through or not. There are going to be marketing deals that makes the game on the platform that has a marketing deal have the majority of the resources and time spent towards that and make sure that one looks the best, plays the best, gameplay demos are the best, all that type of stuff before they optimize it for the other platforms. Third, swiftly detecting any diversions from and ensuring compliance with a commitment as to technical or graphical quality would be challenging. For example, Microsoft might release a PlayStation version of Call of Duty where bugs and errors emerge only on the game's final level or after later updates. They really believe that Microsoft would take Call of Duty and literally release the game with a shittier version of it on PlayStation on purpose. Bugs and errors emerging only on the game's final level or after later updates. To me, that's absurd. There's no way they would do that, because then they would be degrading their own product. And in 10 years, 5 years from now, when everyone recognizes Call of Duty as a first-party Xbox game, it would just hurt the perception and the marketing of the game on a platform that has so many users. And again, it would just create bad PR. Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense for them to do that. Even if such degradations could be swiftly detected, any remedy would likely come too late, by which time gaming community would have lost confidence in PlayStation as a go-to venue for Call of Duty. Why would they do this? It doesn't make any sense. Xbox is getting money from PlayStation to build up their ecosystem. Why would they want to degrade the product on the other platform and then lose those customers potentially? They may not even go over to Xbox. They may just not even play the game. Like, that's a risk that they would be taking. Indeed, as Modern Warfare 2 attests, Call of Duty is most often purchased in just the first few weeks of release. If it became known that the game's performance on PlayStation was worse than on Xbox, Call of Duty gamers could decide to switch to Xbox for fear of playing their favorite game at a second-class or less competitive venue, something that already occurs between both of these consoles, especially the ones with the marketing deals. I mean, how many people do you think are going to be picking up Baldur's Gate 3 now on Xbox? There's probably a large consumer base out there that have heard just the news before the game has even been released that they're having issues with the Xbox version, and that's why they haven't announced a release date. and they may have both consoles. There's so many people that are just going to forget that the Xbox version is even coming out. And again, this is a game that's been marketed via the PlayStation Showcase. They obviously have a marketing deal with it. D, Microsoft's proposal to keep Call of Duty on PlayStation illustrates why behavioral commitment would be difficult. The remedies notice explains that the CMA is open to the theoretical possibility of a behavioral remedy, specifically because Microsoft informed it of existing and potential contractual arrangements with third-party platforms relating to access to Call of Duty. As the CMA is aware, SAE made known its concerns about the transaction of Microsoft almost a year ago. In the intervening period, Microsoft has not shown any real commitment to reaching a negotiated outcome. What? They haven't shown any commitment to reaching a negotiated outcome. They've offered 5-year deal, 10-year deal, deals to Nintendo, deals to GeForce Now, deals to anyone in the industry that wants to put their hand up and say they want Call of Duty on their platform. But they've shown no commitment to reaching a negotiated deal. That's crazy to me. They have dragged their feet, engaged only when they sensed the regulatory outlook was darkening, and favored negotiating in the media over engaging with SIE. Microsoft's most recent proposal, which SE received, redacted, is telling. Okay? I guess you got to take their word for it because we don't know exactly what's in that proposal. Well, we will see Microsoft's... we know what Microsoft has said about it as well. That proposal fails to provide adequate protection for PlayStation's access to Call of Duty or for competition. Instead, it reveals Microsoft's lack of commitment to ensuring full and equal access to Call of Duty, confirms the risks of a behavioral remedy outlined in the guideline, and reinforces SIE's belief that Microsoft intends to use Call of Duty strategically to dominate the gaming sector. For buy-to-play and multi-game subscription services on consoles, as well as for cloud, Microsoft's proposal suffers from 4 main deficiencies. The standard of parity of the parity obligation, Microsoft's scope to deviate from the agreement, pricing, and term. So there's the 4 things. Now, we don't have the contract. It's obviously not public. So we got to take their word that for SIE's perspective, those 4 things aren't adequate enough for them. There's not enough wording in there. There's not enough confirmation about the standard for parity. That there's not enough confirmation they won't deviate from the scope of the agreement. There's not enough information that they definitely won't raise the price of it, and then the term. At least for numbers 1, 2, and 3, Microsoft has said that they are absolutely willing to sit down and negotiate. I mean, we saw what Brad Smith said. He's willing to open up Microsoft Word and negotiate this thing. I feel like that's something if Sony was willing to play ball and negotiate a deal, sit down at the table, which so far we know they aren't, those things would all get rectified. I mean, that's what negotiations do. In terms of the term, who knows if Microsoft's willing to give more than 10 years? Maybe they are willing to give 15 years to Sony specifically. I mean, I just don't think Microsoft cares that much about the console version of this game and where it is, because it's such a big game. It's like Minecraft. They still keep Minecraft on every platform. But I feel like all 4 of those things would easily be negotiated if Sony sat down at the table with Microsoft and they came to a deal. But they haven't, and they're complaining about it here to the CMA. Standard of parity obligation. Microsoft's proposal does not offer a clear commitment to parity that is legally hard-edged and enforceable despite its repeated public utterances to the contrary. So yeah, I mean, that's just what they're saying, what I just talked about. Maybe those things aren't clear enough for them, but I'm sure they would negotiate this under a deal. Under its proposal, Microsoft is obliged to use redacted parity between PlayStation and Xbox and the respective MGS services. This is a vague and weak commitment. Okay, so they go on that. Scope to deviate. Microsoft's proposal allows too wide of a scope for Microsoft to deviate. They're talking about, obviously, the enforcement of this deal, which a third party could come in and enforce it, but that clearly isn't good enough. Under the proposed terms, Microsoft's vague and low bar that would essentially, again, that's redacted. I'm not going to read this part because a lot of it, like the important things, are redacted. Pricing for the buy to pay, stuff that they've went over in terms of potentially selling Call of Duty for a more expensive price than on Xbox, and then people just going and playing it on Xbox and playing within these subscription services. And then pricing for multi-game subscription services. Microsoft's proposal in multi-game subscription services is even more troubling. Microsoft proposes to license, okay, all of this is redacted, and I'm guessing they're talking about licensing the game to PlayStation for PlayStation Now at a certain fee that would make the PlayStation service unviable, which is what they talked about up above. This would commercially destroy SIE's MGS business model, a yearly subscription to PlayStation Plus Extra. SIE's mid-tier MGS service is priced at around $100, and the buy-to-play retail price of Call of Duty today is around $70. Under Microsoft's proposed terms, SIE would therefore be required to pay. Fortunately, that's redacted because that would be very interesting to see. As the chart below shows, this would leave SIE with only redacted full 100% annual subscription. So all of the interesting stuff here, the numbers all redacted. Unfortunately, we can't see any of that. As a result of this proposal, Call of Duty would become a Game Pass exclusive by default and thereby dominate MGS services in the future. It is not surprising that this would result from Microsoft's proposal, as this is Microsoft's desired outcome. Microsoft has already told the CMA that it plans on differentiating Game Pass by not making Activision titles available in the same manner or at the same time on other subscription services. And I agree with Sony. That is a valid point there. This entire thing, that is 100% a valid point. Microsoft obviously is trying to prop up Game Pass with, besides the mobile side reasons for this deal, it is to prop up Game Pass, expand cloud gaming, and by putting these games, which would be their first party games if this deal goes through, into the subscription service, which would definitely entice a lot of people to go sign up to Game Pass versus PlayStation Now. The thing here is, if you're the CMA and you're looking at this, and you look at how many copies of God of War just sold, look at how many copies Spider-Man has sold and how popular of an IP that is. How many copies do you think Spider-Man 2 is going to sell? It's going to be insane. And all of their first party content, you're sitting there and thinking, well, you guys have these games. Why don't you just put them in your subscription services? Wouldn't that allow you to be able to compete with this subscription service? Wouldn't that definitely entice gamers to sign up for PlayStation Now Extra if you put them in that tier, or even premium if you put them in that tier and you can raise the prices of that tier? I think the obvious answer is yes to that, but they aren't willing to do that, which again brings me all the way back to, it sounds like this is a business model thing by PlayStation. If this deal would not allow PS Plus to be commercially viable, and if putting their first party games into PlayStation Plus would not allow their business to be commercially viable, they clearly haven't adjusted properly as the industry has grown if one game is going to shatter the entire business of PlayStation. This is what that sounds like to me. Now, Microsoft proposes a term for buy to play Microsoft game services on consoles and for the cloud. Neither is a sufficient time period to enable SIE to develop a rival to the industry's most important franchise. As the CMA itself recognizes, it is very unlikely that a game on the same scale as COD would emerge in the near future. Accordingly, once these licensing periods end and Microsoft forecloses PlayStation's access to Call of Duty, gamers would be left with little choice as to which platform could host their favorite games. And then finally, we have the end here, which is the last part, and then we have the conclusion. Microsoft has in the past not complied with behavioral commitments or has not respected the public's statements. Microsoft has in the past made commitments to regulators that it did not keep. So this is interesting because we'll see what they mention. First, the European Commission found in 2004 that Microsoft committed an abuse via its dominant Windows operating system by depriving rivals of indispensable interoperability information. The EC ordered Microsoft to supply the input to rivals at reasonable fees, an order Microsoft agreed to follow. This would be broadly the same kind of promise that Microsoft will be making to license Activision content to rivals. Microsoft later violated the EC's order by demanding unreasonable royalty fees and patent payments for the interoperability information, leading the EC to fine the software company $1.3 billion. As Neelie Kroes, then EC Competition Commissioner, stated, Microsoft was the first company in 50 years of EU competition policy that the Commission has had to fine for failure to comply with an antitrust decision. I hope that today's decision closes a dark chapter in Microsoft's record of non-compliance. So I guess they're looking at that and they're saying they will make all these promises. They will even potentially give us a good licensing deal for Call of Duty. But when this deal closes, they're not going to comply to it. And then they're going to use their power and their licensing power for that game to foreclose us by giving us a crappy deal. And $1.3 billion fine to Microsoft, not a big deal, essentially. It would probably be more than $1.3 billion today. A couple $1 billion, Microsoft, not a big deal, probably. I mean, they would probably be willing to pay $3 billion to get out of this deal right now if it's not going to go the way that they wanted. So, I mean, that's a valid point. They could essentially circumvent everything. You can't say that isn't something to take into account. It is. Like, that is definitely something that Microsoft could do because of the power and size of that company. Second, the EC raised concerns in 2009 that Microsoft had illegally tied its Internet Explorer browsers to Windows OS. To resolve the case, Microsoft promised the EC that, among other things, Windows would include an Internet browser choice screen to enable users to select their default browser. But Microsoft removed the browser choice screen from its Windows Service Pack release between 2011 and 2012, causing the EC to fine Microsoft $731 million for violent commitments, and small amount for Microsoft. Microsoft later took full responsibility for the breach and apologized for it. While not a violation of a behavioral commitment, Microsoft's conduct in relation to the ZeniMax acquisition provides additional evidence of why a behavioral commitment should be approached with caution. Now, this is interesting. When Microsoft proposed acquiring ZeniMax, it told the EC that it would not have the incentive to seize or limit making ZeniMax games available for purchase on rival consoles, which they didn't. They did not. They're following that. This is absolutely what they haven't done, because they have kept all those older games on those platforms, games that were there. Microsoft also publicly stated to investors that we highly encourage cross-platform play. If it's good for the gaming ecosystem, it's good for us. We don't have intentions of just pulling all of Bethesda's content out of our competitors' platforms, which they absolutely did not. I mean, they could have pulled DSO offline. They could have pulled Fallout 76 off of other platforms. They could have pulled every Bethesda game that's ever been on PlayStation off of it and put them just into Game Pass. People would have switched 100%, but they did not. So they aren't lying. And Sony admits this. They didn't break any agreements here. They didn't lie about this. They are doing what they said. What they never said, ever at all, was that Starfield was going to be on PlayStation. That was never once said by Xbox. Phil Spencer never said this. And the only thing he did say is Starfield is going to be wherever Game Pass is after the deal was done. And if you remember with Starfield, the rumors were that they were in negotiations with PlayStation to get Starfield exclusive, which would mean we would have never seen Starfield on any other platform besides the PS5 for a certain period of time. At least with Xbox, with Starfield, it's going to be the same thing with Elder Scrolls 6, most likely, is that the most amount of access to those games is being had with an exclusivity deal. So they never said any of this stuff, and they admit it here. I guess they're just trying to make the CMA believe that they insinuated that Starfield and these upcoming big Bethesda games would be on other platforms, and then they ended up not doing that. But soon after the acquisition closed, Xbox's head Phil Spencer revealed that all along the deal was about delivering great exclusive games for Xbox. Of course that's going to be part of a $7 billion deal. And of course it's going to be part of a $70 billion deal. Mr. Spencer later confirmed that the upcoming release of two Bethesda's most popular titles, Starfield and Elder Scrolls, would be Xbox exclusives. They are salty, just like all the fanboys out there right now. PlayStation is extremely salty about this. In response to the news, Pete Hines, Bethesda marketing boss, said, "Sorry, all I can really say is I apologize because I'm certain that's frustrating to folks, but there's not a whole lot I can do about it." I mean, that's just like an entire sentence taken out of context for an interview that he had and doesn't tell us anything. But they added it in there, and I guess it's up to the CMA to do their due diligence and to look at it, what all of these statements truly mean in the entirety of the context. We're at the conclusion. In conclusion, to address the competitive harm caused by consoles and cloud gaming, the transaction should be prohibited or subject to a structural remedy. SAE is extremely skeptical that an agreement with Microsoft could be reached, much less monitored and enforced effectively. As a result, a behavioral commitment that was designed to form the basis of agreement between Microsoft and SEA should not be accepted by the CMA because there is no realistic prospect of such an agreement being reached that would maintain effective competition. More generally, behavioral remedies are unsuited to this case because of the lever that would give Microsoft over PlayStation and the difficulty the CMA would encounter in specifying, monitoring, policing, and enforcing any behavioral commitment. So there it is. That is the entirety of PlayStation's response to the remedies proposed by the CMA. Sum it all up. If you sat through this entire thing, I mean, thank you. That's pretty impressive because this is coming on an hour video. They don't believe that there will be any way that the deal can be enforced by a third party. They believe Microsoft is going to degrade Call of Duty on their platform to try and foreclose them. And overall, they just think Microsoft's lying about all the stuff that they said about keeping the game equal on every platform, and that the deal should be blocked because Microsoft or PlayStation does not have a viable business model without Call of Duty. I guess that's the best way to sum it up, but I'm going to leave the deal there, guys. Let me know what you think about this stuff. Again, if you sat through this entire video, thank you. And let me know what you thought was interesting from this document. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you enjoyed the video, hit the dislike if you disliked it, and I will catch you guys in the next video.